There are moments in life when it feels like everything is collapsing, like the weight pressing on your shoulders is too heavy to carry another step. You question everything. You ask, why me? You stare at the ceiling at night, heart racing, eyes full of tears, trying to understand what went wrong, what you did to deserve the pain, the rejection, the silence. You try to be strong, but there's a voice in your head whispering that maybe, just maybe, you're being punished. That maybe God is angry with you, that maybe you failed in some unseen way. But let me tell you something you may not have heard enough. You weren't being punished. That storm you just came through, that darkness you thought would swallow you whole, it wasn't the end of you. It was the making of you. It was never meant to destroy you. It was sent to shape you, to mold you into the version of yourself that could carry the purpose waiting on the other side. You see, we only grow through tension. We don't find strength in comfort. We discover it when we are pushed, when we are pressured, when we are stripped of what we thought we needed and left standing with only our breath, our faith, and our will to continue. In those hardest moments, something powerful was happening beneath the surface. You didn't see it at the time, but you were being forged in fire, not burned, but refined. It's about consistency, every unanswered prayer, every closed door. It was part of a greater orchestration. One that didn't make sense at first, but now begins to reveal itself in clarity. God wasn't trying to break you. He was preparing you. And preparation always feels like pain when you don't yet know the purpose. The people who hurt you, the opportunities that slipped away, the times you fell to your knees begging for something to change, all of it was leading you somewhere higher. You weren't forgotten. You were being focused. Your spirit was being strengthened. The voice in your head telling you to quit, to stop hoping, to give up, that was fear. But the quiet whisper that kept saying, just hold on, that was God. And you did hold on. You didn't fold. You didn't walk away from yourself. Even if you stumbled, even if you broke down in tears, you kept showing up for life. And that's what mattered. That is why God is happy, because you didn't just pass through the fire. You passed the test. You didn't curse the storm. You learned to dance in the rain. You didn't lose your soul chasing answers. You kept it pure, even when it would have been easier to harden it. That matters more than you think. The world may not reward integrity, patience, or humility in the short term, but heaven does, and heaven is smiling on you right now. You see, real power isn't found in pretending everything's fine. It's found in getting up on the days when nothing makes sense. It's found in believing there's light even when your world is pitch black. You proved something sacred in the unseen realm. You proved that you were trustworthy with pain, with loneliness, with delay, and that's why the gates have opened. That's why peace is beginning to return. You've passed through the valley, and now the mountaintop is within reach. So don't look back in regret. Don't dwell on what hurt you. Look forward with reverence. You were being watched not with anger, but with hope. The hardest time wasn't the end. It was the beginning of your awakening, and now that it's over, the heavens rejoice. You've crossed the threshold. You've been found ready, not because you were perfect, but because you endured with heart, with grace, and with quiet, relentless faith. And now you walk forward not as the same person who once doubted, but as someone who knows deep within their spirit, if I made it through that, there's nothing I can't face. You see, silence from God doesn't mean you're being ignored. It means you're being observed. It's in those quiet chapters where your true growth happens. Not in noise, not in applause, but in solitude. In the space between the asking and the answering, your soul was being prepared. The silence didn't delay your purpose, it deepened it. Because sometimes God will withhold the answer to see if your faith can survive without one. Sometimes the test is not about whether you can run. It's about whether you can stand still and trust. So many people quit in the quiet. They confuse God's calmness with disconnection. But the strongest hearts are those that beat steadily in the void. The ones who say, "Even if I can't hear you, I'll still walk with you." And you did that, you kept going. You moved even when it felt like you were walking through fog. You showed up when your emotions told you to stay in bed. You gave thanks for what little you had. That's power, that's depth, that's proof that your faith wasn't shallow. It was rooted. In those silent seasons, something invisible but vital was growing. Your resilience, your patience, your spiritual maturity, like a seed buried in the earth, unseen for weeks, even months, before a single sprout breaks through. You looked like you weren't moving, but everything inside you was being transformed. Your character was being stretched. Your ego was being dismantled. Your soul was being taught to surrender, not with resistance, but with peace. There's something incredibly powerful about a person who doesn't need noise to stay loyal. When you kept praying despite the silence, you weren't being naive. You were being refined. The silence was sculpting you, teaching you to find strength not in immediate results, but in unwavering belief. And now, as you emerge from that chapter, you realize what it gave you. You're not as reactive. You're not as anxious. You don't panic when things slow down. Why? Because now you know stillness is not a sign of failure. It's often the moment before the shift. Sometimes a teacher remains quiet during the test, not because they've left, but because the test is yours to complete. And you did. You stayed the course. You didn't abandon your values. You didn't trade your soul for temporary comfort. And that matters more than you know. That's why now there's movement again. That's why opportunities begin to flow. Because what was once hidden in the silence is now being revealed. You have become someone who doesn't just survive storms. You understand seasons. You don't panic when things pause. You've learned that even in silence, something sacred is happening. Your trust grew stronger than your doubts. Your inner world became calmer than your circumstances. That's not weakness, that's mastery. God was watching, not to see if you could win when everything was working, but to see if you could worship when nothing was. And you did. You kept the flame burning when the wind was against you. You carried your hope like a quiet fire, never letting it go out. And now heaven rejoices not because you shouted the loudest, but because you remained still and faithful when it counted most. What you endured in silence built the strength you'll carry in every season ahead. And that's why this moment is so powerful. Because it's not just about coming out of the dark. It's about who you became in it. You see, the deepest growth rarely leaves us untouched. Life has a way of marking us, not because we're broken, but because we've been through something real, something hard, something transformational. Those moments where you felt abandoned, when you questioned your worth, when the pain was louder than your hope. Those moments shaped you. And the scars, they are the quiet echoes of your strength. They whisper to the world, this one didn't quit. This one walked through fire and came out with wisdom. There's something powerful about a person who carries their scars with dignity. You no longer need to hide what hurt you. You no longer need to pretend you were never wounded, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means owning the journey. The scars remind you of the battles that changed you, and change is not failure. Change is growth, and growth always comes at a cost. But the price you paid was not in vain. When you think about what you've survived, when you go back to those moments when you were breaking, when your heart was heavy, your body tired, your mind overwhelmed, remember how far you've come. You didn't let the pain define you. You didn't stay down. Yes, you may have cried. You may have doubted. But you kept rising, you kept moving. Even with the wounds, you found a way to keep going. That is why your scars shine. Because they carry not just the pain, but the victory that followed. Often, we want to erase the past. We wish certain things had never happened. We dream of different choices, different people, different timelines. But the truth is, everything that brought you here was necessary. Every struggle, every loss, every moment of confusion. Without those things, you wouldn't have the depth you have today. You wouldn't have the compassion, the insight, the resilience. And without the scars, you might forget just how much strength it took to stand again. Some people see scars and turn away. They see imperfection. But those who know, those who have lived through real pain, they see something else. They see courage, they see testimony, they see someone who faced darkness and didn't lose their light. And that's who you are now, not just someone who survived, but someone who was transformed. You carry wisdom now that only experience can give. You understand the weight of sorrow, and that's why your joy feels so sacred. You know what it's like to be broken, which is why you never take peace for granted. You remember what it was like to be overlooked, and that's why you treat others with kindness. These qualities weren't born from comfort. They were born from struggle. And your scars are reminders that something powerful came from something painful, so don't hide them. Don't shrink from your past. Walk proudly with every mark that life has left on you, because each one is part of your story. Each one proves you didn't give up when you had every reason to, and now you've entered a new chapter, not because life got easier, but because you got stronger. There will always be people who don't understand what it took to become who you are. But you don't need their validation. You've been validated by something far greater, by your endurance, by your growth, and by the silent approval of heaven that watched you fight your way through the hardest season of your life. And now, when you look at your scars, don't see pain, see proof. Proof that you were tested and you triumphed. Sometimes divine guidance feels like isolation. It doesn't come with loud announcements or flashing signs. It comes quietly, like breath. You don't always recognize it in the moment. You only see it in hindsight when the dust settles and the pain fades, and you begin to notice how perfectly the pieces aligned, even when it seemed like chaos. Every delay, every detour, every closed door, it wasn't life working against you. It was life being rearranged by hands you couldn't see. You may not have understood it then, but there was purpose in the waiting. There was direction in the stillness. There was meaning in the silence. The path you were on wasn't random. It was carved out specifically for you. The pain that you thought was pointless, it was part of the process. The people who walked away, their absence created space for new wisdom. The opportunities that slipped through your fingers, they were never meant for the version of you that existed back then. You had to grow first, you had to evolve, and so the path took you where it needed to go. Not always where you wanted, but exactly where you were meant to be. In those quiet, lonely moments, God was not far from you. In fact, He was closest, just not in the way you expected. You wanted comfort, and instead you were given strength. You asked for clarity, and instead you were taught trust. You prayed for rescue, and instead you discovered resilience. And now that you've come through it, you see the truth. You were never walking alone. You were being guided, even in the dark, especially in the dark. There's something incredibly powerful about someone who continues to move forward without knowing what's ahead. That kind of courage, that kind of trust, it doesn't come from the world, it comes from something higher. And you carried it. You moved when you didn't have all the answers. You walked by faith, not by sight. You didn't wait for things to be easy. You made the decision to keep going, even when it was painful, even when it was quiet, even when it didn't make sense. Now you understand why some things had to fall apart. Now you see why some relationships had to end, why some seasons had to dry up, why some prayers weren't answered the way you hoped. It's not because you were forgotten. It's because you were being rerouted, guided through valleys that would teach you to see differently, to think differently, to live differently. And though it hurt, it worked. You're here now, stronger, wiser, clearer. You're no longer chasing clarity. You're walking in it. You don't need to know every step ahead because you trust the one who is walking with you. That's what the hard season gave you. A deeper awareness, a quiet confidence, an understanding that even when the world feels silent, your spirit is still being guided. And that kind of guidance doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't rush. It unfolds. You don't have to carry the weight of figuring everything out. You don't have to pretend you have all the answers. All you need to do is keep walking with intention, keep trusting the process, and keep remembering how far you've come. Because if you made it through all that uncertainty, all that heaviness, all that inner conflict, then you've already proven what you're made of. And now the path ahead begins to reveal itself, not because the struggle is over, but because you've learned how to walk it with strength. You've learned how to trust the unseen hand that was guiding you all along, and that trust will take you further than fear ever could. You may not have realized it, but every time you stood up after falling, every time you chose patience instead of panic, every time you whispered hope into your own broken spirit, you activated something, not on the outside, on the inside. Your soul was aligning, your spirit was maturing, your energy was being refined. And in that invisible space where discipline meets devotion, something divine began to stir. The response didn't come in lightning or thunder. It came slowly, silently, like the earth warming before the first sign of spring. While you were focused on surviving, heaven was preparing to respond. It wasn't ignoring you. It was waiting for the moment when your endurance was no longer just an effort, but a signal. You didn't need to prove anything to the world, but your consistency proved everything to the higher power watching over you. When you chose to keep going, when you didn't let bitterness take root, when you didn't let failure define you, that's when something shifted. You didn't realize it at first. You were still in the fight. You were still pushing through pain. But slowly, the air around you began to change. A new clarity arrived. A deeper calm entered. Doors you never expected began to unlock, not because of luck, not because of chance, but because you proved that your soul was ready. Life doesn't reward speed. It rewards stamina. And your endurance was the prayer that didn't need words. It said, I'm still here, I'm still trying, I still believe. And that's what moved heaven. Not the loud declarations, not the emotional highs, but the quiet, unwavering commitment to keep going even when everything said stop. There's something sacred about a person who doesn't need visible results to keep acting with integrity. You chose what was right, even when it was hard. You kept your heart open, even when it was bruised. You chose gratitude over resentment, growth over blame. That kind of choice doesn't just change your life. It aligns you with a greater rhythm. The rhythm of divine timing, the pace of real transformation. Now that you've crossed that threshold, now that you've emerged from the silence, you can feel it. Something has shifted within you. You don't panic the way you used to. You don't beg for things to happen. You've developed a trust that's unshakable, not because everything is perfect now, but because you know what it cost you to get here. And that knowledge is priceless. That awareness is power. You're not the same person who entered the storm. You're steadier now, more grounded. You've let go of the illusion of control, and in doing so, you've stepped into real alignment. Heaven didn't respond to your comfort, it responded to your character, and now what's flowing into your life isn't random. It's not sudden, it's the result of everything you kept doing when nothing seemed to work, every quiet act of discipline, every moment you walked forward with trembling hands and a tired heart, every time you refused to give up, even when giving up looked like the easier path. That's what built this moment. You didn't wait for peace, you became peace. You didn't wait for a sign, you became the sign, and now you carry something unbreakable. Because you earned it, not through shortcuts, not through applause, but through faith that kept walking when the road was invisible. And that faith has brought you to the place where breakthroughs begin, not because the fight ended, but because you kept showing up without expecting to be rescued. That is why you're ready. That is why the shift is real. Because the response you were waiting for was waiting for the version of you who refused to quit. So often we think of peace as the final destination. We think the point is just to be okay again. But the truth is, everything you endured has led you to something bigger than just peace. It has led you to purpose. You see, now that you've passed the test, now that you've survived the drought, heaven doesn't just say, "Well done." Heaven says, "You're ready." Ready for more than just comfort, ready to carry something meaningful. Ready to give, ready to teach, ready to lead, ready to live not in fear or survival, but in truth and depth. There's a joy that comes when you stop chasing the next thing and start appreciating the version of you who can finally stand still, breathe deep, and say, "I made it." And that joy, that peace, it isn't passive, it's not weak, it's powerful. It speaks through your presence, your words, your choices. It's the joy that comes from alignment, from living a life that no longer depends on noise or approval, but on clarity and conviction. What's ahead of you isn't just about reward, it's about responsibility, not the kind that drains you, but the kind that elevates you. Because now you carry something others need. You carry wisdom, not theory, not borrowed words, but lived experience. You know how it feels to lose yourself and find your way back. You know what it means to be broken and still choose to love. You know what it takes to keep walking with dignity when no one is watching. That kind of knowledge is rare. That kind of strength is sacred. So don't rush this season. Don't race to the next milestone. Let this chapter unfold. Let it breathe, the joy you're feeling now. It's not an accident. It's the result of spiritual alignment. The pain didn't take you away from your path. It brought you deeper into it. And now you walk not with fear of the unknown, but with quiet confidence in the one who brought you this far. Your energy is different now. You're not frantic. You're not desperate. You're clear. You're rooted. You know what matters and what doesn't. You don't have to force things to happen anymore. You've learned how to flow with what's real. And because of that, you'll begin to notice something. The right people begin to appear. The right doors open. The pressure fades. It's not because life suddenly got easier. It's because your soul stopped resisting. You're no longer at war with what is. This isn't the end of your story. It's the start of your legacy. You didn't come through all that just to return to who you were. You came through it to rise into who you're meant to be. And every step from here is touched with purpose, not because you finally arrived, but because you finally understood that joy was never the reward at the end of the road. It was the light you carried through it. You are no longer walking in fear of the past. You're walking with the quiet power of someone who has seen the worst, felt the weight, faced the silence, and still chose to believe. That belief, that endurance, that unshakable core, it's what separates those who merely survive from those who rise and shine. And now, with the hardest chapter behind you and heaven smiling upon you, you walk forward light in your eyes, peace in your step, and a knowing in your heart that the path ahead will be nothing short of extraordinary, because now you don't just carry joy, you carry proof.